Hello, welcome back. From our last lesson we were preparing our polygon mesh to export to Mudbox, and I've done one more thing that I haven't shown but you already know how to do, and I've just used editing vertices and edges to flatten out my ears from the side of my skull here and just enlarged a bit of this ear kind of cone just to get away from the kind of previous Shrek-like ears that I had. The only reason I did this was to kind of save myself some time in Mudbox, but you don't have to do that. You could just go directly to Mudbox and resculpt them to look like this quite quickly anyway, as we'll see. If I was to export this to Mudbox, I would just select my mesh and go File, Send to Mudbox. We get connected to Mudbox quite quickly and 2015 opens up and I get this error basically telling me my UVs are not set, they're incomplete, we need to fix them. I'm going to select keep this mesh just so we can see what's going on. Now if I look at my UV set, it looks very unorganized. And to some of the new users, you might think, well, it's working, I'm able to export it, I'm even able to paint. The problem is you won't be able to paint as expected, and I'll show you what I mean. I'll go through the Mudbox interface in a moment, but right now I'm just going to create a new paint layer, hit OK, click my paintbrush. I've got a green brush set up, and I'm just going to hold my B key down, take the size down, and if I start to paint along the top of my skull, it looks great because along my UVs they are kind of laid out to work like that. You can see how it's coming into the eyes though, and if I continue to drag down the back of my neck, I get this funny result that it just kind of snaps down or stops halfway. It gets worse as I paint along my face, and all of a sudden it should probably just fill in to areas like that I don't want to. Now I didn't want to fill in the front of my face, and it's because my UVs are all messed up. So let's fix that in Maya before we go too far. I'm just going to close Mudbox down, and I'm going to create UVs based on this bonus tools UV editing auto unwrap UVs. Auto unwrap UVs is based on edge selection, laying out UVs. You have to think of it as unwrapping or flattening out your mesh. And I like to think about, when you're in art school and you had to create a cube, that is a 3D cube from a piece of paper. And that piece of paper was cut out to be six-sided, and you joined it to form a cube. So you need to create a seam, just like you would kind of cut the edges to create a seam in your paper to lay out a box or flatten this out. I'm going to cut a seam down the back of my skull that's going to kind of occur just behind the ears, and this should flatten out nicely. Actually, maybe the problem is that if you double click the center line, that's kind of my symmetrical line down the center of my skull. I'm just going to turn off my image plane, and if I double click that edge, it should come nicely down the center of my face. In an orthographic view it should be nice and flat, but if you've knocked any vertices off by sculpting, you're going to want to flatten that back, and the easiest way is just to go to your scale tool and just drag this first before you start doing your UVs, just a kind of trick before we get that far. So back to my head, I'm going to flatten out, and I'm going down the back of my seam because when we paint we won't really see this, or it's the least visible point. Go back into object mode first, and I'll just deselect it. So quickly I'll just go back to my bonus tools, UV editing, auto unwrap, and what's nice, it's going to tell me what to do. So I'm just going to go ahead and enter the tool. I'm leaving this all at default, and it's going to say, well, you have to select a mesh first, if you can see that up here. So I'm just selecting my mesh, clicking continue. It gets into this nice kind of light green, and it's asking me to predefine edges for the texture borders. Texture borders being my UV borders. So now I can start selecting that back edge, which will be hidden when I'm painting, or the least visible edge. And what this will act like when we paint, this will be like a seam. So think of it like when you're wallpapering a wall, you're going to have a seam. You have to hide that seam best way possible, and the best possible way for us to hide our seam is to have it at the back of our object where we won't really see it. I'm going to go up maybe just one more edge here. Now that I've done that, I'm going to hit continue. Check your results and hit done if I like what I see. I do like what I see, and if I go into my, I can close that down for now, go edit UVs, look at my UV texture editor, I can see now that I have nice flattened out UVs that are all organized to make sense, and they're cut based on that selection of edges I made, and it's laid this out flat, like unwrapping, and a lot of times we call this skinning or pelting. For now I'm just going to, I'll just close that window down. I like what I see, and I'm going to hit done. And I can see the results by looking at this checkerboard texture that's been created. Now I'm getting a bit of a display issue here with these green points, but that's okay. We'll just have to ignore it for now. If I was to save and reopen it, it probably would be gone. I can see that I'm getting a nice checkered pattern all the way through. There's no seams. The only place I see a seam is back here where I made my selection, which is not too problematic because we can paint that. Great. The one thing about UVs, if you're not familiar with UVs, is that this space from 0 to 1 in U and 0 to 1 in V represents resolution space, or texture resolution space, so that the more surface that is taken up within this space here, the more resolution I'm able to add. So I want a lot of paint resolution for my around my facial features, but along the neck and back of my head I don't need to see a lot of detail. So I need to make sure that this area takes of my face here, I'll just zoom in, needs to take up as much of my UV space here as possible. I need to utilize as much of this space as possible. And there's a couple of ways to do that. First, I want to make sure that in my image I'm in shade UVs is turned on. If this is turned on and I see any red or different colored blue, it means that I've got UVs overlapping. I'll just demonstrate by selecting a UV here, and if I just move it out of the way, I can see that I've got an overlapping UV. I don't. It unwrapped everything quite nicely. But what I would like to do is just try, there's a few tools I can use to kind of lay out these UVs a bit better so I get as much texture painted as nicely as possible. I'm going to go into my lasso select mode, and I'm just going to kind of lasso select the UVs around my eye here. And I'm going to go to a tool called Smooth UV Tool, and there's this relax and unfold. I'm going to drag this little like pivot point to the center of my eye, and I'm going to say relax, and just drag to the right with my left mouse button until it relaxes nicely. So now you can see I get a much better result than I had before. Back to that lasso select, I'll select the other side of my eye here. Smooth this center of my eye, left mouse and drag to the right to relax these UVs. Try that a bit more. So now we're getting a much better result for laying out our eyes that we had before. I'm going to do the same for my mouth. I'll include the nose in that as well. Let me just select Fine, Tools, Smooth, and put that in the center of the mouth here, and just drag to relax that. Now I'm getting too much of the nose here. I'll undo that, select Tool again, and I'll just work on the mouth. The nose is pretty good, so this whole area is fine, because they're fine right now. What I want to do now is, if I just, whoops, let me just use, back to my regular select, I'll do a marquee select of all my UVs. And under polygons in my UV editor I can say optimize, and that should try and optimize some of these a bit more. I'll just go Control Z to see the difference. I think I like what I had originally, so I don't need to do that. It's just a little trick I use to see if I can get a better result. Sometimes it doesn't. And back to my lasso select, I'm going to try and just get more area of this face to cover more of this surface area. So let me just select around the face here. Actually, I'll select the ears as well. Let's try this again. And now I'm going to use my scale tool, and I'm going to hold or turn on my soft select so that I'm not going to ruin anything. Take that soft select brush size down a bit, and I'm just going to universally scale that face up a bit more. I'm going to repeat that, but just in a smaller area, just around the mouth. So that's pretty good. So now I am getting more of the face, taking up more of the area. I'm going to drag, and now I'm going to turn soft select off, W for move, X for my snap key, and I'm just going to snap this to the center of my UV mapping, and I can have a better look to see what's going on. So now I'm getting much larger or more uniform checkerboard mapping as I'm getting to the back. So that's not too bad. I would still like to optimize this better. Let me just see what this might do. So there, that's kind of cool. That brings the border up to my top as well, and then probably allow me to just take that in just a bit. Allow me just to scale this up a bit more around the eyes, mouth. Actually, let me just go chin, just around that face here. Cool. So now I'm getting more detail in the face with smaller checkerboards than I am in the back of the head here, which is a nice accomplishment. We were able to do that quite quickly. I'll just make sure that Put my X key down and I'm scaled in the center of that coordinates. I have a bit of space top and bottom, left and right, which is nice, and I'm ready to export. So I'm going to go back to object mode just so we can see what's going on. Getting a bit of stretching here, but that won't be too noticeable once we start painting. It should be fine, because most of our detail is going to be in the face where we need it. I'm going to go Control-Alt-S to save this. Now with this selected, I'm going to say File, Send to Mudbox as a new scene. And I'll add a new paint layer. You see I did not get an error about my UV. If I go to my UV view, we can see what we have here. A new paint layer. And just for demonstration purposes now, if I paint around that face, it's behaving like 3D Paint should. I'm not filling in any areas ahead of time. It's not jumping around. It's okay. Cool. So I can go back and just delete this paint layer, because what I like to show you before we move on to our next tutorial is that you're saying, where are the eyes? I can go back to my layer, unlock, say select objects, and send to Mudbox as new scene. Oh, sorry. I don't want to send as a new scene. Update current scene. And here it's telling me that I'm getting a bit of UVs and I'm getting some points, and these are these points that are, as they call them, degenerated faces. These are points that are connected or triangulating near the iris of the eye. We can just say keep all to ignore it, and it's going to show me that it's the front and back of this eye where I get an error, but we don't have to worry about that. And we're ready to start sculpting in Mudbox. Thank you.